The drive from Aurora to East Chicago took exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes. Duke was pleased with himself. Of course, the dark blue Lincoln town car had that I-Pass transponder doohickey on the windshield, hidden up there behind the rearview mirror, and that saved a lot of time. Jesus, he could still remember the days when you had to stop every 10 miles and toss another 40 cents into the bucket, like feeding a friggin' Salvation Army kettle. And it wasn't only the inconvenience that made Duke uneasy. There was always the possibility of a distracting commotion from the trunk of the car, slight but ever present. So naturally, Duke was more than a bit relieved to pull into the parking lot at the marina in East Chicago. Fat Charlie, as usual, hadn't said a word since they got on the east-west tollway a mile and a half outside Aurora. That would have been at a couple of minutes after midnight, because Duke could see by the digital clock on the dashboard that it was now 11:10 in the morning. Duke didn't mind the silence. He could handle silence. But the music played by the radio stations in Chicagoland this time of night either made you nuts or put you right to sleep. Technically, you could say that Duke worked for Fat Charlie, but Duke figured they were on the same level. Duke did his job, which was to drive the car, and Fat Charlie did his, which was to drive the boat. Or were you supposed to say pilot the boat? Whatever. Duke didn't have the foggiest notion. He wasn't a boat guy. Anyhow, they were a team. At least it wasn't snowing tonight. There was a lot of slush on the side of the road, but the IDOT kept the middle part of the pavement pretty much clear. The silly phrase, "the idiots from IDOT," flashed briefly through Duke's brain. That was what Joey the Rat used to call them when he and Joey were partners. Joey was a kick in the pants. He was never silent, not that one. Guy was a bundle of laughs. Sometimes, like tonight, Duke kind of missed Joey, who was doing 15 to life over in Joliet. Duke pushed the little yellow button under the dashboard and the trunk lid popped open. They both got out and walked around to the back of the car. Jesus, it was cold. Duke slapped his bare hands together and blew a cloud of thick steam out of his mouth. He could feel the moisture in his nostrils start to freeze up. The wind was blowing off the lake at 18 miles an hour, and the temperature, considering the wind chill factor, was 12 below zero. "Could we move it a little?" he asked Fat Charlie, who seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the 55-gallon garbage bag in the middle of the trunk, right where they'd put it. "I'm freezing to death." Together they tugged the garbage bag out of the trunk and dumped it on the gravel-covered parking lot. Duke gently pressed the trunk lid down and it latched with a faint click. The boss didn't like it when one of his guys busted up the equipment. For one thing, it cost too much to fix. For another, you never could tell when you were going to be in a tight spot and might need reliable gear. You might not, as they say, be in a position to pull off the road and make the necessary repairs. "Take good care of your car and it'll take good care of you," his pop always said. Funny he should think of Pop now. After all, Pop had been dead going on 15 years. 15 goddamn years since he'd busted Duke's balls. Pop was always one way or the other busting Duke's balls. Duke guessed he'd never gotten what your psychologists call closure. That could account for a lot of things. He took the feet end and Fat Charlie took the shoulders end, and together they lugged the garbage bag across the parking lot, through the gate, and down the wooden ramp to the dock. The 30-foot Carver 300 sedan bridge rocked gently in the water at slip 42. Jesus, she was a beauty. She had a nominal cruising speed of 18 knots, but if you pushed her, she could get up to 25. They took the tar cargo below and stowed it in the forward stateroom. Then Fat Charlie went topside to the helm and Duke got ready to cast off. Fat Charlie slipped the key in the ignition and fired up the engines. The twin 260 horsepower Crusaders roared to life, and the water beneath the boat swirled and slopped against the dock. Duke jumped back aboard, and as soon as they had cleared the dock, he went below. Duke figured he had about an hour and a half before they reached the South Chippewa Basin, where they would dispose of the cargo. He flipped on the heater and sat down on the white vinyl upholstered settee in the dining area. He felt the vibrations through the hull as the big boat picked up speed. There was always a lot of tension when he drove down the east-west tollway, especially when the trunk was occupied. But the rumble of the engines and the rocking motion of the boat out on the lake made him feel a lot better. He leaned back on the seat cushions and began to relax. Now he could do one of two things. He could catch a quick cat nap, or he could prepare the cargo for disposal. Strangely enough, he wasn't tired any longer. Something about the sound of the engines and the thud of water against the hull perked him right up. He got up from the settee, went to the forward stateroom, and opened up the garbage bag. She was a mess. Well, Jesus, she fought like a tiger when they tried to get her into the car. Duke didn't like female contracts. 9 times out of 10, they were a lot more trouble than male contracts. With a guy, you could pretty much figure how it was going to go down. When a guy was whipped, he generally gave it up with all this pissing and moaning. But a chick was something else. Still, he didn't like to hit a woman. Something in his upbringing, he figured. Duke sighed to himself and started to remove the tattered clothing from the cargo. It was really her own fault, you might say. The bitch had come up north to make trouble for the boss, and when they asked her politely to get her ass back on the bus, she didn't pay attention. The girls at the club definitely did not need representation. They were all just one rung up the ladder from hookers anyhow. They probably didn't any of them pay taxes on their tips, let alone on what they more than likely lifted from the wallets of their marks. Health benefits and sick leave? Give me a friggin' break. And then there was the bigger problem of the second set of books she found where the boss had hidden it in the downstairs rumpus room back behind the porno DVD collection. Jesus, messing with management was one thing, but the boss pointed out this was the last straw. Still, she was cute in a skinny sort of way. Reminded him of that singer. What was her name? Oh, yeah, Cher. Reminded him of Cher. Come to think of it, she also kind of reminded Duke of his daughter Melanie, who had left home when she was 16 and moved to Los Angeles. His wife Helen had come unglued. Not that Helen had all that much glue holding her shit together at the best of times. When they got married, she was hell in bed. Then she was just Helen. Lately, she was just hell. Duke chuckled. That's a good one, he thought. I'll have to remember that one. The bitch was still breathing. He could see the rise and fall of her chest when he unbuttoned her blouse. No funny stuff, but they didn't want any laundry marks or such to identify the remains should it surface. Not much chance of it coming back up, though. The South Chippewa Basin was 550 feet deep. When he took off her bra, he could see that she'd had her breasts surgically enhanced. The hairline scar marking the insertion point was tiny, but it definitely was there. Duke had very good eyesight. Probably wrote that shit off on her taxes as a business expense, he mused. Improvements to the property. After he'd stripped off her panties, he snugged the garbage bag back up around her throat and wrapped some masking tape tight around the top, leaving just her head sticking out. It was kind of Duke's signature, you might say. He and Fat Charlie had learned that if you left some air in the garbage bag and taped it shut like this, the cargo would bob up and down on the water for a good long while before it sank. Fat Charlie'd back off the boat about 40 yards, and they'd both take target practice until the bag sank beneath the surface of the lake. Of course, they used silencers on their weapons. Sound carries a long distance on the water at night, even in a high wind. Duke checked his wristwatch. They still had about 25 minutes to go. He was restless. What the hell? He wrestled the bag off the bed in the forward stateroom and bumped it up the steps to the hatch. He opened the hatch and dragged the garbage bag out onto the deck. Fat Charlie was at the helm, maybe 8 feet above where he stood. He was staring straight ahead, not paying any attention to what Duke was doing. Duke had a sudden inspiration. "Hey, Charlie," he yelled into the wind. "I'm going to christen the bitch before we launch her." He unzipped his pants and whipped out his equipment. As luck would have it, he didn't have to go. Like in those doctor's offices when they want you to give them a urine sample. Nada. He remembered something his mom had said. She said, "Think of a mountain stream flowing downhill." He bent his knees slightly and closed his eyes, thinking of the trickle of a mountain stream gently spilling over the shiny rocks. He was getting very close. Suddenly the bag rocked forward and the girl inside clamped his penis in her teeth and began to shake her head like a terrier shaking a rat. Jesus, it hurt. Duke jerked his hips back, and then he found that wasn't such a good idea, so he tried to slap her mouth off his penis, but she just hung on like that Gila monster from hell. Fat Charlie wasn't paying any attention, and Duke wasn't in a position to do anything but yell. And then the pain stopped abruptly. Duke looked down, and there was blood gushing all over the deck. Then the pain came back, only this time it was about 20 times worse. "Jesus Christ, Charlie," he hollered, "the bitch bit off my fucking dick." The garbage bag wobbled in place for a moment, and then it pitched off the deck into the water. It bobbed and floated in the wake of the boat. Duke didn't care. He could see his life flowing out onto the deck beneath him, and all he wanted to do was make it stop. Fat Charlie turned around to see what all the commotion was about. From his vantage point, all he could see was the top of Duke's head, and Duke yelling about something. He throttled back on the engines. "Call a medic, Charlie," Duke begged, his hands grasping his crotch. "I'm fucking bleeding to death." Fat Charlie climbed down the ladder to where Duke stood. Duke had torn off his blue woolen shirt, and now he had the shirt wrapped around what was left of his severed penis. There was blood everywhere. Fat Charlie helped Duke below and got him as comfortable as possible on the settee. Then he turned on the digital Marine SSB radio and began fiddling with the dials. "Send out a mayday, Charlie," pleaded Duke. "Get a helicopter out here or something." Fat Charlie shook his head slowly and switched off the radio. "Not a good idea," he said, turning to face his partner. "We'd have an awful lot of explaining to do." "What are we going to do?" asked Duke. His skin was a ghastly shade of pale, and he'd begun to shiver from the cold and the loss of blood. Fat Charlie grasped Duke gently by the shoulders and dragged him back up the steps to the hatch. "Come on, Charlie, you gotta save me," Duke whined. "We're partners." "Sorry, partner," said Fat Charlie, "but when you don't do your job, I gotta do mine." Fat Charlie opened the hatch and dragged Duke up into the rising wind. The garbage bag no longer bobbed in the wake of the big boat. It had disappeared from view. "See you on the other side," said Fat Charlie as he shot Duke between the eyes and shoved the body off the boat. He had a lot of cleanup to do before he turned the boat around and headed back to the marina. 15 minutes later, Fat Charlie heard the faint sounds of another boat that seemed to be headed in his direction, and he quickly decided he'd tidied up enough for the time being. He climbed the ladder to the helm and eased the throttles forward. The big boat came to life and began to pick up speed. Fat Charlie cranked the wheel to starboard. The big boat came about and headed back to East Chicago. Earl and Vern were out on their evening cruise. They worked for the 9th District U.S. Coast Guard, patrolling the waters around the South Chippewa Basin. A blip had shown up on their sonar, and they had come by to check it out. It was gone now. "Maybe some jetsam," said Vern. "Or is it flotsam? I still get the two confused." "Could be either," said Earl. "Flotsam is wreckage, whereas jetsam is garbage dumped overboard. But they both could float." "Oh, yeah," said Vern. "Well, I best go topside and see if I can see what's out there." He put on his foul weather gear and opened the hatch. The wind was blowing full force now, whipping up the water and howling around the deck. Vern stepped onto the deck and stared into the water. There was something out there, bobbing on the waves. A big black shiny ball. Vern turned back and shouted into the cabin, "Hey, Earl, we got some sort of stuff out here. Probably a load of garbage tossed off a passing boat, but we best scoop it up out of the water before the bag busts." "Damn tourists. Didn't their mothers teach them anything?" Vern guided Earl until they were alongside the floating bag. He was about to grab hold of the plastic when he saw the face sticking out. Jesus, Earl, looks to me like we got something a whole lot more interesting than flotsam or jetsam. Come on up here and give me a hand. Earl shut down the engines and came up on deck. Together they dragged the plastic sack and its morbid contents aboard. The girl's face poking up out of the black garbage bag was a mottled shade of blue, and Vern could just barely make out a whisper of ragged breath. Her lips were drawn back in a fierce scowl and her teeth were clenched together tightly. But Vern could see she wasn't going to last much longer unless they got her warmed up pretty quick. Indeed, aside from that slight hint of labored breathing, there were no signs at all that she was still alive. Vern shone the flashlight full on the battered face of the girl bunched up inside the garbage bag. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, Earl, he gasped. You ain't going to believe what she's got stuck between her teeth.